You are listening to Radio Talkies FM. Have you ever had that feeling, that sense that the very ground beneath your feet is shifting somehow? Like the world you thought you knew, all the rules, the structures, it just feels like it's dissolving, and something new, maybe unsettling, is starting to emerge, but you can't quite, wrap your head around it yet.
Oh, absolutely. That feeling of being adrift, maybe, where the old maps, the old ways of understanding things just don't seem to work anymore. It's a really powerful sensation.
Yeah.
And it's striking, isn't it? When you look back, people have felt exactly this way at other major turning points in history. It's not unique to us now.
Exactly. And that's precisely why the source material you sent over for this deep dive is so, well, fascinating and maybe a bit challenging too.
It is dense stuff.
We're looking at excerpts from this essay written back in the early 1930s, The Worker, Dominion, and Form. It also has a preface written later, which adds another layer.
Right. So the author is writing in the shadow of World War I, a time of just immense upheaval and transformation across Europe and the world.
And they weren't satisfied with just, looking at the politics of the day or the economic charts.
No, not at all. The goal was deeper. They were trying to identify what they saw as the fundamental forces, the underlying currents, and maybe even the new types of people they believed were truly shaping the future, regardless of what politicians were saying.
It's like they felt the surface-level analysis was missing the real story.
Precisely. They saw a deeper transformation underway.
And you, our listener, you brought this specific text to us. You wanted to really get to grips with its core arguments, even the parts that might feel quite difficult or maybe even alien to our way of thinking today.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to try and guide you through this material, pull out the key insights, the main arguments.
And the central claim, the big one, is pretty stark. The author argues that the whole bourgeois world, the world centered on the individual, on security, on certain Enlightenment values, was basically dying out.
It was in its death throes, as they saw it. And something else was rising to take its place.
Something radically different. A new era defined by this figure the author calls the worker.
And we need to be really clear here, like the author is, this isn't the worker just as an economic class like in Marxism.
No.
It's presented as a new form of human being, a new type. Almost a different kind of humanity.
Enabled by technology, which plays a huge role, and oriented towards a completely new understanding of power, of order, what the author calls dominion.
It's a very grand, almost monolithic vision. It tries to explain everything in this new framework. So yeah, let's dive in and try to unpack it piece by piece.
Okay, let's start where the author starts, with what they see crumbling. The bourgeois world. The basic idea is that this whole era, dominated by the figure of the bourgeois individual, it's over.
And that includes its core values, the things that held it together. The author emphasizes things like security, a certain kind of individualism, and reliance on abstract principles.
Like what specifically?
Well, abstract concepts like justice, virtue, freedom, understood as a kind of contractual right between individuals. These are seen as the bedrock of the bourgeois worldview.
Right, and the author describes the typical bourgeois person as the atom of that world, doesn't he? Kind of isolated, self-contained.
Exactly. And their primary drive, the absolute core motivation, according to the text, is the search for security.
Security above all else.
Yes. It's about building walls, both literally and metaphorically, trying to seal off a comfortable, predictable space, insulate oneself from danger, from risk, from the raw elemental forces of life itself.
Which makes sense if you think about the rise of insurance, comfortable homes, predictable laws, all hallmarks of that era.
Precisely. And their idea of freedom is completely tied up in this quest for security. It's not about confronting the elemental. It's about being secured from it. Freedom means having certain abstract moral rights guaranteed, or being able to enter into predictable formal contracts with other secure individuals.
It's a very ordered, rationalized, and, well, maybe somewhat timid view of existence from the author's perspective.
That's certainly the critique. And this leads to one of the author's sharpest points. Trying to understand the chaos and the new forces emerging after World War I using the toolkit of the 19th century, that's doomed to fail.
It's like using outdated software on a new operating system.
Exactly. Concepts like class struggle in the purely economic sense, or thinking you can fix things by just adjusting the social contract, maybe adding a few amendments. The author sees this as fundamentally misunderstanding the scale and nature of the change.
They believe something much deeper is shifting, something at the level of human type itself.
Right. And they even dismiss concepts that were gaining traction then. Things like international, social, democratic From this perspective, these are often just seen as, well, bourgeois pretenses, attempts to paper over the cracks or extend the old logic where it no longer applies.
So the old ways of thinking are inadequate. And the author also sees a lot of bourgeois activity as basically escapism.
Yes, forms of escape from this new, dangerous reality they saw emerging.
Yeah.
Things we might see as positive or just cultural pursuits like romanticism, losing oneself in art or museums, focusing intensely on individual life stories, biographies.
Why escapism?
Because, for the author, these activities represent a turning away from the elemental, from the danger and the collective forces shaping the world. They're seen as signs of a weakened life force, a preference for the curated past or the individual psyche over the harsh realities of the present. It's retreating into that secure zone when the walls are actually crumbling.
That's a tough critique of culture.
It is. And there's that incredibly specific, almost jarring detail the text uses as an example.
The Faust example.
Exactly. The mention of German workers' representatives, presumably socialists or social democrats, in 1919, right after the War and Revolution, supposedly carrying copies of Goethe's Faust in their bags.
Which you might think shows they're educated, cultured.
But that's not how the author reads it at all. For them, it's the perfect symbol of this bourgeois clinging. Faust is all about the individual striving, inner turmoil, pax. It's the epitome of that older, individualistic, museal, meaning museum-like, preserved consciousness.
So even these representatives of the workers were, in the author's view, still trapped in the old bourgeois mindset, unable to grasp the new reality.
That's the interpretation offered, yes. It shows how deep this bourgeois form runs, according to the author, beyond just economic class. They're looking past the political labels to what they see as these fundamental forms of being.
And it's not just individualism that's failing. The author argues other big 19th century ideas are also running out of steam, right?
Yes, specifically nationalism and socialism, seen as powerful forces in the 19th century. But the author argues that when you try to apply them universally, push them to their logical extremes in this new era, they don't lead to a stable order. They actually tend towards fragmentation, towards anarchy.
Because they still operate within that older framework that's dissolving?
That seems to be the implication. They are part of the outgoing world order, not the foundation for the new one. So the diagnosis is stark. The old world, the bourgeois world, its values, its concepts, its organizing principles, they're all fundamentally breaking down.
Okay, so the old is collapsing. But the author isn't just predicting chaos. They see something new, powerful, and maybe quite unnerving emerging from the rubble. Let's talk about the worker.
Right, and again, that crucial clarification. This is not just the industrial proletariat of Marx, that's maybe one manifestation, but the author is talking about something much more fundamental.
A new form of human being, a new type.
Exactly, a new humanity, as the text puts it. This worker figure represents a different mode of existence, one that's inherently, even inexorably antagonistic to those fading bourgeois values of security and individualism.
So how is this new form described? The text uses the term typuses, right?
Yes, the typuses. That's the specific expression, the concrete manifestation of this emerging new humanity. The author argues this typuses is actively replacing the bourgeois individual as the defining human figure of the age. It's becoming the dominant template, so to speak.
And what does this typuses look like? What are its characteristics? The text gets quite specific, almost unnervingly so.
It does. Uniformity is a key element, a move away from individual distinctiveness toward a kind of standardized appearance.
Well, standardized how?
The author points to very concrete things. Physical traits becoming more uniform, widespread beardlessness, for example, or specific short, practical hairstyles. Standardized clothing, like uniforms or workwear, becomes more prevalent. Head coverings are mentioned.
And then there's the whole theme of a mask.
Yes, the masked appearance. This is really striking. The author notes the prevalence of literal masks, gas masks left over from the war, but also emerging things like sports masks, protective masks in industry, welding masks, things like that.
And this isn't just seen as practical gear.
No, it's interpreted symbolically. These masks, along with the uniform traits, represent the suppression or even the irrelevance of the unique individual face, the unique personality. It's the typuses, the form that matters, not the specific person behind the mask.
Wow. That's a really stark contrast to the bourgeois world, which was so focused on individuality, on personal history, on expressing your unique inner self.
Absolutely. The typus is about function, about fitting into the collective form, about readiness for action within a dangerous world. Individual nuances are secondary. or even obstacles.
And this relates to how the typist understands freedom, doesn't it? It's completely different from the bourgeois idea of abstract rights.
Totally different. The author argues the worker's freedom isn't granted by a constitution or a contract. It's described as something inherent in necessity. It's found within the demands of the work, the task, the situation.
So freedom isn't freedom from constraints, but freedom through accepting and mastering them. Something like that. The text says freedom exists only to the extent that one is responsible to the form of the worker. It's about aligning yourself with and acting according to the demands of this new type and its function in the world.
That is really counterintuitive for us today, I think. We tend to see freedom as autonomy, as being independent of external forms or demands.
Definitely. But the author turns this around. They argue that it's precisely this new kind of responsibility, this obligation to the form, that enables extraordinary accomplishments.
How so?
Because it connects the individual directly to the elemental power, the functional necessities of the world of work. It's not about individual whim or preference. It's about effectively channeling energy and capability within the structure of reality as the author sees it. It's the power to act decisively within these large-scale forces.
Okay, so the typist is uniform, masked, finds freedom and responsibility to the form. And what about their relationship to danger? You mentioned the bourgeois seeks security, right? That's another massive point of contrast. The bourgeois individual, as we discussed, tries to wall off danger, to create a safe space. The typist, the worker, does the opposite.
How so?
The author claims this new type has a completely new and fundamentally powerful relationship to the elemental, to danger, to risk. They don't flee it. They don't try to ignore it. They confront it directly. They engage with it.
Like the soldier in the trench or the industrial worker facing powerful machinery.
Those are certainly potent images that align with this idea. The text suggests that this direct engagement with danger, with the harsh realities of the modern world, technological, elemental, perhaps political, isn't debilitating. Instead, it's seen as a source of strength, of hardening, of a kind of realism.
There's that really vivid phrase the author uses, something about a landscape.
Yes, the idea of living in a landscape of ice and fire. It evokes a world that is fundamentally inhospitable, dangerous, stripped of bourgeois comforts.
Not a cozy living room.
Definitely not. And surviving, thriving in such a landscape requires a specific attitude, a specific posture. The author calls it warrior skepticism.
Warrior skepticism, what does that mean?
It seems to imply a kind of clear-eyed realism, a rejection of comforting illusions or ideologies, the skepticism part, combined with a readiness for action, for struggle, for facing reality head-on, the warrior part. It's about navigating this dangerous world without flinching.
So putting it together, the old bourgeois individual seeking security and focused on their unique self is fading, and this new typist is emerging uniform, often masked, finding freedom in collective responsibility, and embracing, or at least directly confronting, danger as a source of strength.
That's a good summary of the contrast the author draws, a fundamental shift in the human form itself.
Oh, absolutely central. The author has a very specific view of technology. It's not just seen as a collection of tools or gadgets that people happen to use.
It's more fundamental than that, much more. Technology is described as the very manner, the specific way in which the form of the worker this typist interacts with, and, crucially, mobilizes the world.
Mobilizes the world. What does that mean exactly?
It means technology is the means by which the worker harnesses resources, directs energy, shapes the environment, and organizes activity on a massive scale. It's the how of the worker's engagement with reality.
So it's not neutral. It's not just a tool that could be used for bourgeois ends just as easily.
According to this text, no. Technology is intrinsically linked to the worker form. It serves the worker. It extends their reach and capability. It embodies their mode of being in the world, efficient, functional, oriented towards action and transformation.
Okay, and this idea of mobilizing the world through technology, that connects to another key concept in the text, doesn't it? Total mobilization.
Exactly, total mobilization. The author argues this is a defining feature of the new era, and it's replacing older concepts like, say, universal conscription that you saw in the 19th century.
How is it different? Conscription mobilized soldiers for war.
Total mobilization goes far beyond that. It's not just about raising an army. It's the mobilization of the entire society, the total population and its means, as the text puts it.
Everything.
Everything. All resources, all energy, all human activity, industry, information. Everything is potentially drawn into this state of readiness and directed towards the prevailing goals, whether those are explicitly warlike or related to large-scale work projects or state plans. It's a permanent state of potential activation.
Wow. So the distinction between civilian and military, between peacetime and wartime, starts to blur.
That's precisely the implication. The entire society becomes a kind of constantly mobilized resource base.
And the author saw examples of this already happening in the early 1930s.
Yes, they point to things like the development of global communication networks. The specific example given is a battlefield news service being transmitted instantaneously across the globe from a transmitter in Manchuria in 1932.
Why is that an example of total mobilization?
Because it shows how even information, news from a remote conflict zone, is immediately integrated into a global network, becoming part of this larger mobilized system. Events anywhere can be instantly known and reacted to everywhere, drawing everything into a single, interconnected field of action and information. Distance is overcome. Everything is potentially immediate and relevant to the mobilized whole.
That does sound intense. A world constantly on alert.
It is. And the author also observes how technology itself seems to be evolving. It's not just getting more powerful, but also more unified.
Unified how?
Towards greater precision, greater integration. The author sees technology moving towards a state of perfection, becoming less like a collection of separate tools and more like a single gigantic instrument.
A single instrument?
Yes, an interconnected global apparatus that embodies what the author calls the total work character of this new age. It's technology as a seamless system designed not for individual convenience, but to serve grand designs.
Grand designs, like state projects or industrial plans.
Exactly. And those grand designs need a framework. A way to organize society that goes beyond the old bourgeois legal structures, the constitutions based on individual rights.
Which is where the concept of the plan comes in.
Right. The author sees the plan as the characteristic organizing principle of this new era, actively replacing bourgeois constitutions and the legal frameworks built around the individual.
So instead of a constitution defining rights and limits on power, you have a plan dictating goals and organizing resources.
That's the idea. The plan becomes the operational blueprint for society. It's seen as typical of the shift from liberal democracy, focused on individual freedoms and representation, towards what the author rather starkly calls a work democracy, or even a state democracy.
Work democracy, what does that mean in practice? Does it mean workers vote on the plan?
The text isn't necessarily talking about voting in the traditional sense. It seems to imply a system where legitimacy and function are derived from alignment with the work character and the necessities defined by the plan, rather than popular opinion or individual rights.
So, under this logic, things we consider fundamental, like private property,
become secondary. Property rights, according to the author, cease to be primarily an ethical issue or an individual entitlement. Property becomes a work affair.
Meaning
its justification, its use, its very existence is determined by its function within the overall plan. Does it serve the collective work effort? Is it organized efficiently according to the plan's requirements? Ethical or individual claims become subordinate to these functional considerations.
That's a radical rethinking of ownership and rights.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And the author goes on to describe the kind of environment, the kind of landscape that this planning logic creates. It has specific features.
What are they?
3 characteristics are highlighted: closure, malleability, and armament.
Okay, let's break those down. Closure.
Closure seems to imply a sense of the planned space being sealed off, defined, managed. Not open-ended or subject to chance, but controlled and delimited according to the plan's boundaries. Think of managed borders, controlled economies, defined project zones.
Right, and malleability.
Malleability suggests that the landscape, society, resources within this closed space are seen as fundamentally shapeable, transformable by the plan. Like clay in the hands of the planner, nature, society, people, they are all material to be molded according to the design.
That sounds potentially quite coercive.
The text doesn't shy away from the implications of total transformation. And the third characteristic, armament.
Armament. Does that just mean weapons?
It seems broader than just military hardware. It suggests the entire planned space is in a state of readiness, equipped, fortified, potentially for conflict, or for overcoming resistance, whether internal or external. It links back to that idea of total mobilization. The landscape itself is armed and ready for action or defense as dictated by the plan.
So a closed-off, shapeable, weaponized space. That's the vision of the planned world.
But the author adds a crucial caveat. These characteristics, closure, malleability, armament are described as features of a transition.
A transition to what?
They're seen as temporary, necessary features for creating a kind of workshop reality, a space where the world is being actively reforged, prepared for a future, more stable, more settled state that will emerge once the transformation is complete. It's the scaffolding, not the final building.
Okay, so we've traced the argument. The old bourgeois world dissolves, the new worker typus emerges, technology enables total mobilization under a guiding plan that reshapes the world in a closed, malleable, armed fashion. But as a transition, what's the ultimate goal? What is this all leading towards in the author's view?
The culmination, the end point of this entire process is the establishment of a new form of order, a new kind of power, which the author terms dominion, or Herrschaft in the original German, which carries connotations of mastery, rule, sovereignty.
Dominion. And what is this dominion? Is it just a new government?
It's presented as something more fundamental than just a change in political administration. It's the overcoming of what the author sees as the chaos, the fragmentation, the essential anarchy of the dissolving bourgeois world. It's the imposition of a new, unified and powerful order onto reality.
An order based on what?
Critically, this dominion is only possible, only legitimate in the author's framework, because it represents the form of the worker. Its power, its right to rule, derives directly from its connection to this new, elemental human type and the total work character that defines the age.
So legitimacy doesn't come from elections or divine right or tradition.
No, not from abstract principles or historical precedent. Legitimacy flows from alignment with the essential form of the worker, the typus, and its capacity to master the technological and elemental forces of the world. That's the source of real power in this new age, according to the text.
And this dominion, what's its scope? Is it national?
Here's where it gets really ambitious. The author explicitly states that this new dominion claims planetary validity.
Planetary, as in global.
Yes. The forces the author is describing, the worker form, technology, the logic of the plan, are seen as universal. Therefore, the dominion that arises from them inherently aims for a global scale. It seeks to impose its order not just on one nation or region, but ultimately on the entire planet.
That's a huge leap. Did the author think this would happen easily?
Not necessarily easily. The text acknowledges that the actual path to achieving this planetary dominion might be competitive, uncertain, involving conflict between different centers attempting to establish their version of this order. But the underlying claim to planetary scope is seen as inherent in the nature of the forces at play.
So the ultimate goal is a world unified under this new form of power, representing the worker.
That seems to be the trajectory. And the author insists this new order isn't utopian, it's not arbitrary, it's not just someone's political preference. It's seen as being determined by the deep structures of reality in this new age, what the author calls the metaphysics of the world of work and that pervasive total work character. It's presented almost as an inevitable outcome of these underlying shifts.
But they were writing in the early 1930s. Did they feel this dominion had arrived yet?
No, quite the opposite. There's a strong sense of the text of living through the messy, chaotic transition. The author explicitly describes their time as a period where the old dominion, the old order, no longer exists, but the new dominion does not yet exist.
So caught between two worlds.
Exactly. Living in that workshop reality we mentioned, a time of intense activity, transformation, uncertainty, maybe violence, all part of the process of preparing the ground for the future state, the future dominion, which hasn't fully taken shape yet.
And they saw signs of this future potential even in ancient history, something about landscape design.
Yes, that's a fascinating aside. The author refers to large-scale landscape design, things like massive earthworks, irrigation systems, the planned shaping of the earth itself by ancient civilizations as a testament to undisputed dominion in the past.
How so?
Because undertaking such projects requires immense, unchallenged power and a unified vision capable of marshaling resources to fundamentally reshape the environment over long periods. The author sees this kind of planetary-scale landscape shaping as a task awaiting this future dominion, a sign of its eventual power and scope. Reshaping the planet itself becomes an expression of the total work character.
Wow, okay. So to kind of pull it all together, the author is describing this massive fundamental shift.
A complete transformation, moving away from everything that defined the 19th century. The focus on nations, on socialism versus capitalism in the old sense, on individual rights, bourgeois security, abstract ideals.
And moving towards a 20th century reality, or what the author saw as the emerging reality, defined by this new human type, the typuses, fused with technology.
Defined by the total work character, by society organized to the planet, aiming for a new planetary dominion.
And all of it characterized by a completely different relationship to danger, not fleeing it, but confronting it, engaging with it as part of this new mode of existence.
It's a powerful, coherent, and let's be honest, potentially quite chilling vision of historical change. It presents a world operating on principles very different from liberal humanism.
Absolutely. It's a dense text, and wrestling with it really forces you to think outside the usual boxes, doesn't it? It pushes past our familiar political debates, our economic categories.
It really does. It tries to get at something the author believed was more fundamental, happening at the level of, well, metaphysics in human form.
And even though this was written, almost a century ago, reacting to the specific conditions after World War I, the underlying questions it raises, they still feel surprisingly relevant today, wouldn't you say?
I think so.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Maybe not in the exact way the author predicted. Of course, history rarely follows blueprints. But the core tensions, they resonate.
Like what specifically?
Well, think about our own struggles with identity in an age completely saturated by technology. How does technology shape who we are, how we relate to each other, how we see the world?
Mm-hmm. The pressure towards certain kinds of uniformity online, maybe. Or the way algorithms shape our experience.
Perhaps. And what about the nature of freedom and responsibility today? In these incredibly complex, interconnected global systems, economic, technological, ecological, what does individual freedom even mean? How much are we shaped by forces and plans we don't fully control or even perceive?
That question of the plan, the role of large-scale planning, whether by states or corporations, the sheer power of logistics and data in organizing our world, that feels very contemporary.
It does. And the question of individualism itself. Are we seeing a shift away from the traditional emphasis on the unique, autonomous individual towards something else? Towards identities defined more by group affiliation or function or our relationship to technology? These are all echoes, maybe, of the kinds of transformations the author was trying to diagnose.
Reading this, you do get that eerie feeling sometimes. Are we, too, living through a period where certain old forms, old ways of understanding ourselves and the world are dissolving?
And maybe something new, something we haven't quite grasped or named yet, is hesitantly, perhaps unsettlingly, emerging. It's hard not to wonder.
Which I suppose leaves us with a final thought to mull over, something provoked by this text.
Okay.
If the author is even partially right, if the deep structures shaping our reality, our societies, are driven by forces more fundamental than the day-to-day politics or the latest economic reports, then what hidden forms, what underlying total characters might be quietly, almost invisibly shaping our lives, our world right now? Beneath the surface of all the events and the individual choices we think are defining our time, what's the deeper script being written?
That is quite a question to ponder. What are the unnoticed typoi or plans of our own era?
Indeed. Well, thank you for guiding us through this really challenging but definitely thought-provoking material. You have been listening to Radio Talkies podcast. Until next time, stay tuned for more. See ya.